we are about to do a complete oil change on this 2020 YFZ450R. Now, I understand that probably for many of my viewers, changing the oil, well, you guys probably know how to do that very well by now. But there's plenty of people out there who don't know how to do it, and this video is intended to go over the complete process from start to finish. So we're going to cover everything on draining it, on refilling it, and on all the other parts and pieces that you need to pay attention to as you go through this process. So the first thing that we need to do here is actually wheel this guy outside, and we're going to warm it up and let it run for just a few minutes before we drain the oil. And that way the oil is going to be hot and it's going to fully drain from the engine. Okay, after just a few minutes, like 2 or 3, let's say, maybe closer to 5 if it's particularly cold outside, this thing is ready to crack open. So the next thing I'm going to do is grab a pan, a set of gloves, and a 12mm wrench, and we'll get things started here. Now with my skid plate, I actually have really good cutouts here in the back and in the front for each of the drain plugs. And that means that the easiest way for me to get this done is using a socket with a wobble extension and then a 12mm socket on the end of it. I've also got this 19 here, and that is for my Works Connection oil filler plug. Now, if you have a stock one, obviously you're going to have just something you can twist off by hand. And this will also come up later in the video when we're talking about filling the oil as well. All right, you can see that I got the top cracked. I like to do this just before I even get the process started with opening up the bottom. And then I've opened up the front one and laid that off to the side. And now we need to move on to this guy, which is just behind the shifter. And we'll go ahead and pop that loose and get that draining. All right, so we've got both of our drain plugs pulled and all of our oil has now drained out into the pan below. I've got one of the plugs right here, and I've also got the crush washer. This is something that I would say you need to replace every single time. I know that there's guys out there who would probably tell you otherwise, but these things are so darn cheap, you might as well do it. It's not worth running an oil leak or something like that because you were trying to be cheap and not buy a real inexpensive copper washer. So these do get squished every time that you tighten down your drain plugs, so you definitely need to be changing them out every time. Now, before we go ahead and button up the rest of the motor, we're going to go to the other side and we're going to deal with the oil filter. Right now on our oil filter side, we've got these 3 bolts here on the Yamaha. These are going to be all Allen heads or socket heads. I don't really care which you prefer to call them. And we are using a 5mm Allen. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. I always like to run a rag right here just under it, because otherwise you end up with this oil that runs out of the cover and all over your frame and skid plate and everything like that. So it's definitely wise to just toss a rag down there to soak all that up. And then we are going to use our impact here, and we're going to go ahead and break all these loose. Okay, and then I'm just going to go ahead and remove them the rest of the way and pull that cover off. Okay, now that we got the cover off, like you can see here, I've got a bunch of oil that drained off out of there. So I'm really glad that I put the rag down. And we're just going to go ahead and work on getting this guy off. And this is a good time to go ahead and check and see the condition of your motor. You can see if anything's been caught up in here as far as debris. One good way a lot of people do that, they'll actually take these filters and they will go ahead and cut them open, and then you can kind of see what got collected up on the inside. So I wouldn't say it's necessary to do every time, but if you feel inclined to do so, no reason really not to, other than it makes a little bit of a mess. But worth it to see what's going on inside your motor. I want to talk about these other parts here that often don't get discussed in oil changes. So you've got an O-ring on the inside of your cover right here. And then you've also got these 3 O-rings here around your cover. Now, with these O-rings, you don't need to change them every time, but you do want to change them probably every 3rd oil change. I know people that don't change them at all, and I would definitely not recommend that. You know, they get overlooked because you're doing filters, you're doing oil, you're not really thinking about these kind of, you know, gasket type parts, but they're really, really important. So, you know, I like to do my oil filter every time I change my oil. Some people, you know, they'll go every 2 or 3 changes before they actually do the filter. I'm not going to go ahead and recommend that, but certainly if that's how you do it, that's how you do it. But I do think every 3rd oil change, definitely change these out. Again, you know, is it going to make the biggest difference in the world? No, it's not. Is the cost of the parts high? No, it's not. So for a cheap part, hey, you can avoid any kind of oil leakage, or, you know, let's say one of these broke down over time. You don't want this thing breaking down and then getting like sucked into your motor and blocking up an oil passage or something like that. So yeah, definitely worth it to go ahead and do those. All right, I've got my new O-ring in here. I've got 3 new O-rings in here, and I put my new oil filter in. So all I need to do is put this cover back on, and then we're gonna go ahead and torque this down, I believe, to 7 1/4 foot-pounds. You can see that I've got the 2 drain plugs here ready to go. I put fresh crush washers on both. And I do like to keep just a nice stock of crush washers and oil filters in my toolbox. And then that way I know I've always got some ready to go. So, you know, I might order up 4 or 6 at a time instead of just getting 2 for 1 oil change. And then that way I know I'm always ready to go in the future. Okay, we just went ahead and we threw in both of those drain bolts there and there. And we torqued them down to 14 foot-pounds. If you don't have a torque wrench on you, I recommend you should get one, but if you're doing this without one, just know 14 foot-pounds is not a lot. Okay, so don't be wrenching on these things super hard because, you know, when you strip these things out, man, you're talking about a real serious fix in some cases, and you don't need to be tightening them down that hard at all. If you're even getting anywhere where you're approaching stripping them out, you're going way too tight. So another pro tip: move your oil pan before you go and throw these on, because if you drop one in your oil, you're going to be real bummed out. All right, now the last thing that we need to do is we need to fill the oil with some fresh stuff. So I'm going to grab the materials for that now. All right, I've got my oil here in front of me that I'm going to be using. I've got 2 of these because that's how many I need, and because I run the Works Connection oil filler plug, I don't have dipstick, as you can see. Now, I also don't necessarily love using the factory dipstick. Personally, I like to go ahead and use one of these. It's actually a ratio right used for 2-stroke oil mixing typically, but in my case, I like to use it to measure out the oil for my 4-stroke. I know exactly how much oil goes into my YFZ450R, and that is 1,450 milliliters, which is also milliliters and cc's, which are here, are the same unit of measurement. So what I end up doing is I fill this thing up to 500 3 times, and I just empty each one of those into this right over here. And then I know I said that it was 1450. I mean, you can see the difference between 400 and 500. So that little 50 cc difference isn't a whole lot. And oftentimes when you're using a ratio right, you get a little bit of oil that sits in the bottom that doesn't always go along for the ride anyways. So all said and done, it gets you right about exactly where you need to be. So that's personally my process. And like I said, I mean, this is really nice because you're measuring an exact amount. You're not ballparking at all. And I've never had it go wrong for any of my bikes in the last, gosh, I don't know, 6-7 years since I started using one of these things. All right, I'm gonna do some real risky. Get the shot here for the video, filling it up. You can also see how easy this makes pouring. Don't need a funnel or anything. I'm doing this with my left hand, and I am not left-handed, so just a nice steady pour. And we can dump in our first one, and then we'll do another 1,000, and we'll be ready to seal this thing up and call it a day. All right, there we go. We just put in the last of the oil. I'm going to get this guy started by hand, seal it up. And this doesn't have a torque spec because typically, like I said earlier in the video, they don't actually have like a bolt head to them normally. It's just a finger thing, so you don't need to go tight on this at all. Pretty much, as soon as you feel it come to a stop, like right there, you're done. You don't need to go any further than that. It's nice and plenty snug. And then the last thing that you would do in this case is you'd want to take this thing out, warm it up again, just make sure everything's working right, and then go ahead and call it a day, and you are done with your oil change. So that's it, guys. Pretty simple. If you're, like I said, if you're someone who already knew how to do this, apologize for bugging you with the upload, but if you're new to this and learning how to do it for the first time, I hope this helped out, and please feel free to leave any questions and comments down below. Thanks.